Thanks everyone for being here. Always incredibly grateful to Michael and to Deborah, especially right now for convening folks who bring different ideologies and perspectives to bear on the important work that we're doing in the education context. Governor Swift, out of the gate, I just want to start with you. I'm not going to do intros because Bridget already did, but Governor, what's an issue that people, I'm going to ask each of you this, but Jane will have the least preparation. What's the education policy issue that people are paying the most attention to that they maybe shouldn't be, and what are they missing that they should be paying more attention to?
Thank you. I may be prepared for that. For those of you who have seen me at GSV before, I just need to tell you one thing. I gave up drinking and swearing for Lent, so if you're expecting a show, it's going to be a little more subdued this year, so just so you know.
But you are wearing a hoodie.
I am wearing a hoodie. This is an Ann Wicks design. So in all seriousness, we're in very interesting times, and I think the biggest challenge for policy leaders, for state leaders who are still, Aimee and Katie, who are still out there in the trenches serving students. The biggest challenge is to stay focused, and Katie said this earlier, on the main thing. And I think in higher education, in particular the area I'm in, higher education with the transition to workforce, the challenge is not to be distracted by the shiny thing. And so you would think, if you watch TV every day, that every college student in America is mostly obsessed with protesting, that every institution in America is filled with elite college students. I always make the joke, marching around in their Lululemon pants and their Canada Goose jackets, outraged about something. In fact, what we all should be focused on is, and listen, in the state of Massachusetts, the Commonwealth that I come from, our colleges and universities are incredibly important to our economy. And if this was a biotech investment conference or a healthcare conference, a focus on our elite colleges and universities and the cuts that are happening at MIT and Harvard would have a much bigger impact because they're impacting those economic sectors. What we need to focus on, I believe, in higher education are all the large institutions in our states who are educating the workforce of the future and the huge number of students. So 50%, Georgetown Center for the Workforce, I don't know the exact title, but they don't pay me, so I don't have to. But Georgetown has done some great research. 50% of young adults in America today make less than $35,000 a year. So we can joke all we want about this generation not moving out of their parents' basement, but if you're making $35,000 a year, it's incredibly difficult to live independently in most of our major cities or even our rural or suburban areas to support yourself on that kind of a wage. Many of our college graduates, not because of what's happening necessarily in their college or university, are underemployed because many employers are requiring students to have a year or two of experience and specific credentials. We need to totally re-envision how students are getting work experience and credentials in addition to, not instead of, in addition to a high-value college degree, which many of them are getting, and get them into the workforce with skills and credentials so that there is social and economic mobility for the broad working and middle-class students at the University of Texas, El Paso, at Arizona State University, at the University of Utah, at Maricopa Community College, all the places we're doing business, and take our eyes off of what's happening at elite universities and colleges and focus how we continue to provide upward social and economic mobility for the vast number of students whose parents, caregivers, and they themselves are angry about the fact that the American experiment is not working for them.
Really grateful for that response. And Senator Sinema, maybe take the same question. I've always admired your approach. You've helped to elevate and focus our public consciousness in all sorts of different ways on areas of bipartisan alignment, focus our attention on issues that maybe wouldn't have otherwise been as mainstream. as they were as a result of your work. But what are we missing?
So I'm going to give both a micro and a macro answer. I've been teaching at Arizona State University, go Sun Devils, for 22 years. And that's what I'm talking about, ASU. And what I've seen, I teach both undergrad and graduate students, and what I've seen is a change in the students' preparedness and ability to enter the workforce. So at the micro level, I think that what we're missing and what we need more focus on is teaching students critical thinking skills and the ability to manage situations for which there is no right or wrong answer. So the idea is less about teaching them specific sets of knowledge or chunks of knowledge, and more, because I think we're good at that in our country. But what we're not doing a good enough job is teaching students how to think in situations for which there is not a chunk of knowledge to provide an answer, right? So how do we teach students to think critically in an environment that's rapidly changing and in which the typical answers of A, B, or C aren't going to apply? So that's at the micro level. At the macro level, I would say that universities writ large, both public, private, elite, non-elite, great ones like ASU, that we should be thinking about how to design programs and curriculum that helps students have marketable skills connected to the job market right when they leave. Yeah. So building off what Jane said, look, it's hard out there. They're underemployed. They've got to have a couple years experience before they can get a job. But also, we're not always everywhere doing a great job of making sure that what a student graduates with actually matches with what an employer needs. Now, that's something that we've got to do a much better job at. So that instead of facing situations of unemployment and I need 2 years of work experience, we want students coming out of the gate where an Intel or an ASML or a startup says, an OpenAI says, you've got the skills that I want right now. And there are lots of things that we can do, partnering with corporations through the pipeline in years 3 and 4 in particular of a university program, adjusting curriculum to match the needs of employers, thinking about the jobs of tomorrow rather than the jobs of today and yesterday. Those are the macro things I think that we need to do a better job at.
And they're all bipartisan issues.
Yeah, and none
of this is partisan unless you're insane.
Right. We're going to get to that, but
even if you're insane, I think it's bipartisan.
We're my co-moderator, Governor Swift, just pointed at Superintendent Jenner. So because there's a sort of a softball type. Yeah, but the you are doing that. So I want to continue to pull that thread on what people are fixating on that maybe they shouldn't, and what they're maybe what they're missing. So we'll continue with that theme. But you are doing this work, right? You're focusing on critical skills. So I want to, in the context of that question, ask a little bit about where you're getting, where you might be getting pushback, right? Because I think there's a tendency to hear about these new skills, durable skills. We used to call them 21st century skills not long ago, right? And maybe there are pockets in states like where I live in Alabama that maybe think those are squishy, or those are sort of like newfangled skills, and maybe we're eroding rigor. But in the context of that shift, what are people missing, and what should they be paying more attention to?
Yeah, so I heard a couple questions, and I'm watching the time, because on the pushback, we don't have enough time for all of us to sit here and tell how much pushback we've had in trying to drive good change for people.
It turns out really commonsensical things do sometimes trigger some.
Well, I think the reality is some of our strongest leaders, pushback is what helps establish the common ground that is necessary to drive work the fastest. And I'll give you a prime example. I think there are K-12 folks, a lot of Indiana folks in here, by the way. We come in strong. And I know that there are higher ed as well. I mean, we just overhauled our high school diploma. We said we've got to be more flexible, personalized for children in Indiana so that they can find their purpose and know their value and possibilities. But that level of driving change was really hard. and look no further than Googling my name and universities that are fantastic in Indiana, like Purdue University, and headlines that hit us this summer when we were driving this change. We released a first set of diploma draft in March. We had enormous pushback driving this change during a gubernatorial election year, which lesson learned. But that pushback allowed us to get where we are today. And so where Purdue, and Mong Chang, President Chang is a good buddy of mine. I'll probably text him right after and be like, I called you out, so be aware. Somebody tweets you. But that pushback led us to the second draft, which was released in August. And then you all, last week, we had a major announcement in Indiana that I hope challenges other states. With our new diploma structure, any student in Indiana who gets a certain outcome, which is a seal in the enrollment space, will be auto-admitted to any of our public colleges in Indiana, period. So you talk about a recipe for success and letting parents and students know what that recipe is. Purdue University was the first to sign up, and that all started with pushback and getting to common ground. It got us to a much better place.
I really appreciate that, and I hope folks are encouraged by the work that you're doing and the work that Secretary Guidera is doing in Virginia. I think people often forget that many of the innovations that formed the basis for federal policy grew out of the laboratories for innovation that are state governments. And we've got a governor turned twice ambassador here who's done some of the most pioneering work in early adoption of technology and other things at the state level. But so we're going to come to that in just a minute. I'd love to hear about your time in France and Italy. But you all are moving the needle in Virginia in really significant ways, in ways that I think folks don't appreciate or hear about when they encounter this notion of like shifting power back to states. So tell us what you're doing at the state level that folks should be so excited about.
Great. So I'll start with your original question, if I can do that one too.
Sure, no problem.
So I feel like we're living in Virginia and across this nation that politics is the greatest distraction, and you mentioned that. And what we're missing is a sense of urgency that we're in crisis with our education across this country. And what we just experienced with the NAEP data in Virginia and every place else is that we just erased 20 years of incredible progress, and that we have erased it. And we were telling some good stories that were lifting most boats, and that's gone. And I'm dismayed by the fact that that's not a front page news article on every paper in every town. And instead we're getting distracted by a whole lot of things and a whole lot of political reasons for doing that, which I don't want to dwell on today. And so part of what Governor Youngkin needed to do when he came in was to create that sense of urgency and to be honest with the people of the Commonwealth. Because he came in saying he was going to restore excellence to education. And people said, how dare you? This is Virginia. We are awesome. And that was what we needed to do, was to help people realize that averages mask a lot of realities. And just to give you some of this data, is one, we had the largest learning loss in NAEP in 4th grade, which is horrific in Virginia. But also, as was mentioned earlier, this continues throughout our entire education system. I'll give you a statistic that's a year old. I need to get it updated. And this is probably true in every one of your schools as well, your higher ed. 10% of Virginia first-year students in our 15 four-year schools do not persist onto a second year. And of those 10%, 40% have a debt load of $10,000 when they leave with no degree or no credential. And what we're hearing from our college presidents is what was also alluded to, is that our students are not graduating ready to do college-level work. We're hearing that from our employers, right? We are in crisis. That the signals keep telling us we're not producing the people who are ready, which is why the work that Katie's leading in Indiana is so important, to have these credentials, to have the seals, to have the signals about readiness. And so what we're really excited about what we're doing in Virginia is, one, having an incredible focus on, one, raising expectations and being really clear about what standards of excellence look like at every level. That's in early childhood, with having quality indicators that every parent can access, and now through our portal and use a digital wallet to choose. the best high-quality child care provision. It's in our K-12 system, where we also just redid not only all of our core standards, but also have created and replaced a very faulty accreditation system that, even with that horrific loss in learning loss on NAEP, we were telling parents and citizens that 100% of the schools were accredited. And the message we were giving is, everything's groovy here, nothing to worry about, when the truth was very different. And so we're about honesty telling and transparency and creating a sense of urgency to say we cannot lose another generation of kids, which we're about to. So in our new accountability system, which we very purposely are calling a school performance and support framework, because we're not going to just tell students, and we're gonna name schools as being in need of intensive support, off track, on track, and distinguish, because that's how moms and dads talk. When you go in and say, how's my kid doing? Is she on track or not? So we're trying to use language, but it's not to shame and blame schools. It's so we can identify schools and then make sure that we prioritize the resources of time, energy, and money to the schools, the students, and the communities who need it the most, so that we can, and also use data-driven, proven approaches to make sure that we follow what the data tells us and make advances. And then we're continuing that on through, and the connection with the higher ed, which again is a theme that we're hearing, is that in this accountability system, there's a focus on readiness for life at every level, so that schools will get extra credit and points in their accountability system if they are preparing students that earn an industry-recognized credential, if they are earning college credit, an associate's degree, or they are ready with their military ready. And why that matters is it's not just access to it, what I call the perfume test, where you've been exposed to CTE or you've gone to a college level class, but it's actually mastery and competency, and that you have a proof, again, a signal, like in Indiana, to say, I am ready. And then we're working with our higher education institutions to say, how do we make sure that those pathways are clear, people understand the financial aid pieces of it, so that everyone understands that there's not a one-size-fits-all way of doing this, but that it's that there are multiple pathways to success in Virginia. I could talk more about what we're doing in higher ed, but I've taken up too much breath. But it's about transparency, honesty with ourselves, raising expectations, and then having the system have incentives to change.
Yeah, and I hope folks let that just marinate a little bit. Like, that's a lot to process. That's like a complex system of accountability paired with incentives that are predicated on decades of research and policy experimentation. You're revamping your high school graduation requirements in ways that sort of align with the sorts of skills that are needed for economic mobility, and to address historic inequities in who achieves economic mobility. And this is happening not as a result of federal prescription. It's not happening in a vacuum either, but it's happening at the state level, spearheaded by politicians who are facing political blowback and risk.
I am not a politician.
Sure, but spearheaded.
I really
right?
am appointed. I'm not. I don't run for.
You are appointed, but it's not. You were, but I think that, again, it's important, I think, to let that kind of marinate a little bit. That this is what's happening around the country. It's not a reversion to historic norms. It's about pushing the envelope in terms of systemic improvement and improved outcomes. So, I've asked a few questions. I've popped around. I haven't asked necessarily the question that I said I was going to ask to start. There's kind of two on the floor now, but Governor, Ambassador.
Well, thank you, Ben, and great to be with all of you. And I thought what all of my colleagues had to say was incredibly interesting and important. And particularly, I've been so interested since I was governor, which is a while ago now, it was 2009 and 2017, the idea of connection from school to the workforce. If we had been having this conversation 2 months ago, I think my response now would be different. And I hate to be sort of the skunk at the picnic. But my jaw is on the floor, having gone very deep over the last couple months into AI, which of course is like the topic of half of these sessions here. I don't know what it is that we're making sure our kids, what are we getting them ready for? What does career readiness mean? And I honestly don't know. And on the one hand, I think these technologies are extraordinary and are going to save some of our biggest problems. And at the same time, they obviously represent all kinds of threats in some bad ways, but for the purposes of this conversation, literally, what are we preparing our students for? What kind of work? One of the things when I was governor that I was particularly proud of was the work we did around career pathways. We have much better information today than we have ever had before about the labor market. Where the jobs are, what kinds of skills these jobs require, where people can get these skills. I don't know if that's going to be relevant in 5 years. And I'm not picking a date of like 20 years away, because it's now. And I commend, I mean, particularly the educators who are here, because this is going to be, it's going to be on you in sort of, you know, a very person-to-person way. But when we talk, and I appreciated what the Secretary from Virginia talked about, the need to be honest, and I think this is really important, starting with the political officials that Ben mentioned, to be honest with our constituents. What is this going to look like? And I cannot for the life of me, I read a few weeks ago that applications to law school are way up. And, you know, with apologies to any lawyers who may be in the room, I don't know why. Because when you see what these new models are capable of today, it's really unclear to me what a lot of the lawyers are going to do. And I think you could repeat this, you know, field after field after field. So I think everything that you all said is right, and yet at the same time, like the specifics of what it is that our kids can now aspire to, we don't know. And so I will leave to that. I can see Senator Sinema wants to get in on this.
Yeah, so as you were talking, Jack, I was like, yes, 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 that's right. Which is why I think it's so important that we teach students skills about thinking
Agreed.
and reasoning and being nimble and agile and the ability to change and grow, because then you're not teaching them to go like work at the factory and get the watch when they retire. You're thinking them to provide value that nothing else can replace. Right? It's about the way that they think and reason and behave. And that is about enduring skill sets, not so much preparing for job A, B, C, or D.
Which is why, I mean, so when I was governor, which is not so long ago, but it's, you know, I finished in 2017, I was all over the credentials movement, and I think the credentials movement's incredibly important. But to your point, the critical thinking skills and the ability to be really, really nimble as you think about your career and what you're learning is also really important.
And I would just say one of the things, and this is self-serving, but what we do at Education at Work is, and deeply believe that students in college, but also students in high school, they need to be learning those skills well embedded in work. Yes. And, you know, 15, 20 years ago, no high school students were taking college level courses. Now it is like pretty much ubiquitous. We need to make what the senator talked about, which is college students who are learning skills, learning practical applications, because I'm not a defender of the status quo in higher education by any stretch of the imagination, but to expect that when even folks who are in the private sector don't know what their industry is going to look like in 5 years, to expect the people whose job is to teach college students, you know, very specific tasks and skills, should know what the private sector is going to look like in a different industry in 5 years is unfair. But we can embed students. We can give them both the critical thinking skills, and I do still think it's important to know how to read and write and to read the classics, and everybody should read The Longest Walk about what happened in World War II and know those things and know our history. But then you can get those critical, durable, social, human, whatever we want to call them, and become a lifelong learner, but learn them in practical application so that you are flexible and versatile and making, most importantly, the networks and connections so that you're going to be figuring it out. Because I don't know either, but I know that kids who come from Pell Grant families in our first generation need to have the same advantages to do it as my kids so that they have the same opportunities that kids who come from privilege, whose parents, when they figure it out, are going to tell them the answer.
Yep. That was great. You ready to run for office again? I do have a law degree.
Unelectable.
I have a law degree. There's a bunch of degrees up here. Like, what I don't do is I don't take my law degree down to City Hall and like cash it in and get money, right? Like, and my wife doesn't take her bachelor's degree and cash that in and get money. It turns out, like, you go to school, you engage in learning experiences, you acquire credentials, but then you have to figure out how to translate the skills that you acquire through the acquisition of those credentials into something of value.
Right.
I would be very hesitant to spend $150, $200, $250, $300,000 to get that credential when I don't know what I'm going to do with it.
100%. And by the way, I think what you're wrestling with, and as you've gone through those multiple drafts of the new high school graduation requirements, the work you're doing with Tim Knowles and the folks at Carnegie, that's like a new endeavor. There's sort of like a heuristic shift, right? Like, so, we used to think that we could sort of instrument our way into better educational outcomes with the goal of improving economic mobility. And then we kind of went through this moment where we were sort of like fixated on college access and completion. Not that those aren't worthy ambitions, but that doesn't solve everything.
Right.
And now we're focused on this sort of like, we're kind of at the dawn of this new era where we're focused on the intersection of learning and economic mobility. How do we help people to develop skills and competencies that they're able to translate? People used to ask Jake Schwartz, who was the founder of General Assembly, who some of you might know, and they'd say like, well, I don't get it. Like when people go to a General Assembly coding boot camp, what do they get? Like, do they get a bachelor's degree? Do they get a certificate? And Jake used to say, no, they get a job, right? Like, and so I think we're losing confidence in the value of credentials unless those credentials are correlated. Sorry, go ahead, Aimee.
So just to build on that, so one of the things that we have tried to transform in Virginia in the last several years is using labor market information to make every single decision in our education and workforce systems so that we can try to get, and Governor, it doesn't go to your point of this all may blow up and we may not know in 20 years, but what we've done is that if you want to look at its VOE, Virginia Office of Education Economics, it's basically labor market information that is now available in a timely, actionable way. And what we have done is made that basically be the North Star for everything that we do. So that in 8th grade, we now, as part of our accountability system, every 8th grader needs to do an academic and career plan, which they've had to do for a while, but it was a compliance exercise that nobody ever actually did. Now, every single guidance counselor in the state is being retrained to look at the VOE data, to work with their students, look at the VOE data, understand what are the in-demand jobs right now, what do they pay in the region, in the state, and then what are the multiple pathways to get there and to understand how do you stack credentials, how is it that you could actually earn an associate's degree or get a series of credentials that allow you to get a job or to go back. And what it's doing is blowing up the one-size-fits-all system, but it's also changing the culture that everybody needs to go to college, right, which has failed. That's my whole point. Why we have 10% of our students dropping out after a year of college is they probably weren't ready for college or it wasn't the right thing for them, and yet we keep telling everyone, go. And so by giving people, it's not a gift, by providing people the information that they need and including policymakers and institutions to have that information too. And this is why the second piece we're doing with this outcomes portal at our SHEV, at our coordinating board, if you go look at the outcomes portal at SHEV, you now can see the outcomes for every single higher education institution, including the labor market rates as it compares to the median wages for all the programs of study in Virginia. So what that does for that 8th grader who's going to look at both of those websites in a seamless way is to look and say, what are the most in-demand jobs now and projected for the next 10 years? What are all the pathways I can go? And where are the institutions and how do I earn the credentials and degrees in the most cost-effective, time-effective way? And how do I do it? That is blowing up the system and putting the information into the hands of the opportunity seeker, whether that opportunity seeker is 16, 12, or 66. And that's what we're trying to do to transform. It's empowering people with information that's been sitting in data warehouses, not connected, not done. This is why this conference is so important, is it's full of problem solvers thinking about how do we break down silos, how do we get data to turn into information, and to use it to make decisions for the most important people in this, which are the people who are trying to seek better opportunity.
So Ben, just to pull a thread here, I just looked down at my notes and I was like, is this the Rethinking High School panel that I'm on? Yeah. Or is this the bipartisan? But herein lies our common ground. We have Republicans, Democrats, Independents on this stage, and we have only talked about one topic that we all could one up and add in for probably hours. And so I think our opportunity as a country in a polarized, I'm going to take us back. This is the teacher in me. I'm going to get us back to the polarizing situation that some of us are navigating. Yesterday there was a discussion about how in many cases some folks are paralyzed in the moment, but I just want to call out some people are also empowered in the moment. With tough times, with uncontrollables, you can also, there's such opportunity to seize. You mentioned urgency earlier, and again, the common ground that is quickly, and a couple of us know each other, most of us don't, but that common ground that was quickly established was pretty cool to see. But we are on the bipartisan panel, not the Rethinking High School panel.
And the one thing I would say is, well, it's important to start that in 8th grade and to give students that information. My biggest argument, and this is still bipartisan, but it may be a little bit controversial. My biggest frustration right now with a lot of policy is we're driving those information down into a younger ages and then assuming we don't have to keep giving that information. And to Governor Markell, Ambassador point, things are changing so quickly. So A, we should be providing that information closer to the student, right? Either at the institution level, within a job with mentors, or at the state level, providing it through portals. But we can't stop giving students that information and assuming that if the best pathway is, because I still think nurses are going to need some formal training at a post-secondary institution. And I think we all believe that teachers are going to need some post-secondary institution training. How we train them, what we train them in may continue to evolve, but we need to continue to give them that good data so that they can pursue their purpose, they can find their passion, but they also know what those pathways are, how they're changing, what the data says, and we put a ton of effort and money and policy and philanthropic dollars into pathways in 8th grade through high school. We have abandoned, in many cases, these students once we get them to college, and the data tells us they are in terrible trouble. And the last plea I will make is, the kids who are in college right now where there is massive disruption because of some of the political chaos are the very kids that we locked in their room in their first couple of years in college during COVID or their senior year in high school. They are young adults who have massive issues, and we have disrupted them. They were born in the aftermath of 9/11. They're all the same ages as my children. We are going to lose a generation of students who have been through so much trauma, so much disruption, unless all of us commit to not just rethinking high school, but thinking through what young adults in our country have been through, and we need to give them hope, we need to give them purpose, we have to give them a belief in not just our democracy, but in their own future to both make a difference and have success in this country, because we are losing them.
In data. But so,
data.
Senator Sinema, and then I want to go to Jack.
So, I wanted, Katie was talking about, you know, that some folks are feeling paralyzed and others are like, this is really exciting what's happening, and others are like, oh my God, the world is ending. And I would suggest that perhaps a way to consider thinking about the movement forward in terms of education is to be willing for people of both political parties to just kind of let go of the old stories and narratives that drove your behavior around education. So the stories of, it's not the money, it's the value of the education, or the story of the unions are great, or the unions are horrible. All the stories that we all know and have known for all of these years. I would suggest that perhaps those aren't as important right now, and that the things that we should be thinking about are different than the old stories of right versus left in the large debate around education. Because what we're actually facing, as Jack mentioned, is a great unknown. And with that great unknown comes incredible potential, incredible opportunity, but also challenges that we can't even define yet, right? Because the unknown is so much bigger, so much greater than anything we've ever experienced. And so I would just humbly suggest that the crap that we used to argue about is just not as important right now. And that the challenge that we face, again, is not a partisan challenge. It's an existential challenge for us as a country and as a globe, right? We've got this rapidly changing world, and so much of what we're talking about at this conference is about the development of AI, the power, but also the challenges. And if we allow ourselves to get stuck in the small arguments of the past, that were the political partisan arguments that are still kind of driving the narrative at the national level around education right now, that we're going to miss the boat. And so this is a great time for us to just kind of put down those weapons from the past, which they're dull. They're not even very effective anymore on either side. And instead think, what's the big challenge in front of us and how can we approach it together?
So I totally agree with that, and I'd also say with this uncertainty, I have never been more excited about the opportunities available. I sort of wish I was a bunch younger so that I could really be participating at that level. And I think to your point that, you know, this is not the meeting on the convening on rethinking high school. I think the fact that that is what we're talking about, and I'm guessing most of you really can't tell who is the Democrat and who's the Republican, and you shouldn't, because this is not a Democrat or Republican issue. I mean, this is something that every one of us should be pretty aligned on. The other thing I wanted to say, and I really appreciated what Aimee had to say, I think what you're doing in Virginia in terms of using that labor market information to help kids make the choices about the future is fantastic, because as I said earlier, we have better labor market information now than we've ever had before. The part that we need to focus on is who is going to help these kids understand what it means. And you mentioned specifically guidance counselors. In my state, that would have been very difficult because we have way too few of them. And I think one of the things that we've got to do is really invest in more guidance counselors and good guidance counselors who can help. And the other thing we have to do, and I think about the educators who are in the room, you know, one of the big crises that we're not talking about is recruiting new teachers. And I understand why that is a crisis, but to those of you who are in the classroom, I mean, how can we say thank you enough? Because you are dealing with all of the political craziness and being attacked for, you know, things that have absolutely nothing to do with what you're doing in the classroom. But you're also helping these young people through this period of uncertainty. And so I think really focusing in both on the recruitment of more guidance counselors and on the teacher retention and recruitment crisis is going to be critical, because it's very easy to say these technologies are extraordinary, which they are, but they alone will not solve the problem. These young people need adults in the room who are going to help them figure it all out. And also, frankly, how to assess them, because that's going to be really important when it will look easy, at least on paper, that you understand something. How do you really drill into that?
Those are incredibly powerful statements coming from two leaders that I really admire. Education is so often a proxy political issue. Yes. It's an issue that is encumbered by factions that care an awful lot about systems and institutions, as opposed to, in certain cases, I think in many cases, the beneficiaries, the intended beneficiaries of those systems, and the aspirations and the purpose that those systems and institutions were set up for in the first place. It's kind of hard to tell who's the Democrat and who's the Republican up here. And I think that when you drill down into the education policy context, it's often pretty hard. I don't ever, or certainly very rarely, question intent. I might disagree on a matter of public policy, but heck, I've been at this 25 years, and I've worked with many of you some of you are still in office, and I've worked with some of you when you were in office and out of office. And I think what's so often, what I'm struck by so often, given the work that we do at Whiteboard Advisors, is just how much commonality of interest there is. I was thinking about asking the question, you know, what's the bright spot? You know, where is there bipartisan alignment? And as you all were talking, I was thinking to myself, you know, the better question is, like, where's the divergence? So we've got 40 seconds. I don't know if we can, you know, if we can get through that.
I think the divergence is made up.
Yeah.
So look, there are absolutely substantive policy differences, but those are just different avenues to get to the same end result. I think the differences are mostly made up because, as you said, it's a political proxy. They're made up so that there is a fight and so that you can use the fight politically. And so just don't take the bait. You know, that's my advice. Just
don't take the bait. We've got 10, 9. I'm going to finish this thing on time, and I'm sure everyone's got, but please join me in applauding this group.